Watch this, everybody. All I have to do is move a little bit this way, and I have a halo over my head.
And that's how you know you've done a lot of service. That's when you can stop. Yeah.
Great. So that's actually a perfect segue to starting our programming for today. I'd like to thank all of the attendees and the panelists for joining us on this Friday afternoon at the end of the semester. I appreciate you taking the time out to join us. This is a part of a continued series that RSA is hosting for the remote sessions, and navigating service roles has been a session, or at least a topic, that a lot of tenured, untenured, and contingent faculty have had questions about, and have also tried to navigate in various ways in institutions. So I'd like to kind of tell you how we'll set up for the day, and then we'll get started. My name is Anita Mixon. I'm an assistant professor at Wayne State University in the Department of Communication. I'm a part of the RSA Career Development Committee, and I'll be the moderator today. So you won't hear very much from me, except I'll be asking questions that you put in a Q&A box, or my own questions to follow up with what the participants are saying. We will give brief introductions of the panelists, and then Dr. Lueck, is it Lueck or Luck?
Sorry, Lueck. That's
Lueck,
right.
okay. Dr. Lueck will start us off with some, some kind of pointers from our own experience, and then we'll go through the rest of the panelists. But please do feel free to drop the questions in to the Q&A feature as you have some thoughts about what we're talking about. This should be very much a conversation and not necessarily a lecturing discussion, one-way kind of communication to the audience. If you have any questions, please also feel free to ask questions about tech piece via the chat feature as well. Okay, so why don't we get started? We'll actually do it alphabetical. So Dr. Jones, we'll start with you.
Hi. Make sure you can hear me. I'm Rebecca Jones. I am currently at Montana State University. I've been at 3 different institutions, and the first 2 are bookend as WPAs, and in the middle, I was everything from a graduate director to running gen ed to an assistant dean. So I have a lot of different perspectives. They were all at state school, so I will just put that in there for reference.
Dr. Lueck?
I suppose I should have been able to figure that out alphabetically. I am Amy Lueck. I am associate professor recently at Santa Clara University on the Ohlone and Muwekma Ohlone tribal lands. And I have been at Santa Clara, which is a large private institution ever since I was out of graduate school. So that's the context I'm speaking from. But like I said, recently tenured. So speaking from a very fresh memory of navigating service expectations early career as I'm kind of transitioning out of that just now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Lynch, Associate Professor of English at St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri. Thank you for allowing me to be part of the panel. I was tenured in 2014 and immediately dragooned into writing program administration, which actually I enjoyed doing. And then I directed our prison education program for a couple of years. Prior to that, though, got involved in a lot of service issues, especially around the sort of mission characters. St. Louis, like Santa Clara, is a Jesuit institution, has a very self-conscious notion of mission that requires a lot of tending, and managing that was something that's sometimes hard to negotiate an assistant professor. So that's why I thought I'd volunteer my thoughts here today, but thank you for having me.
Hello, everybody. Jack Selzer. I'm the retired member of the panel, and I'm alphabetically last, which is good. So I'm hoping that everybody else will say everything I was going to say before I had to say it. So because I'm retired, I guess I've had experience in just about every other kind of service role. I was a comp director one time. I was a graduate director one time. I was an associate dean. But mainly, I loved being involved in the Rhetoric Society of America. I love doing service with that, and I'm still involved as in helping out to organize the RSA Institute in 2023. So we're all looking forward to the conference next month, but in a year and a month, I want you to come to Penn State for the RSA Institute. Oh, claim to fame. I once played on the same softball team with Jerry Springer.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Selzer. Dr. Luke, could you start us off with some kind of some pointers that you've arranged?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I have accidentally volunteered myself into the first position by over preparing. So I'm going to just drop a handout that I prepared with just kind of trying to collect my own thoughts about what would I want to have known, or what are some of the kind of learnings I've had in my time so far. And I think I think if we're thinking specifically about early career kind of experiences, it's going to change by institution often. Hopefully you'll be insulated from a lot of service expectations early in your career. Maybe you won't. You'll probably be expected to do some kind of service either way. And if you're at an institution that says that they want to insulate you from service, the first thing I want to kind of maybe add to this handout is to remind people of that expressed intention, because a lot of institutions do have that intention, and that's not the same thing as having that lived experience at that institution. So if you are expected to do some amount of service in your early years, these are some pieces of advice that I thought of to kind of help you to navigate that potentially. And I won't go into all of this in detail, but kind of broad takeaways from my experience. First of all, knowing what you value and saying yes to some of the opportunities that support those things was one thing that occurred to me from my experience, because if you're going to have to do some kind of service, it might as well be in some of the areas that really energize you. And when you have those kinds of commitments already established, it's easier to then say no to other ones that maybe don't energize you as much, especially in those early years when you aren't going to be asked to hopefully do everything. Some of the areas that I've kind of found myself really saying yes to is things that help me, organizing writing groups, organizing professional development opportunities that I would want to see exist, have been a really great way for me to do some service at the institutional level that doesn't feel draining, that feels energizing. Doing things that I already care about. I do work with our community engaged tribal partners, and those kinds of positions blur the lines of service and research and teaching for me in a productive way. So I'm looking for ways that I can make the service that I'm doing do that kind of additional work when possible. Understanding the context of your own institution. We all started with our own institutional context because it's so important. And understanding the context of your own position within that institution too. I have colleagues who didn't really know on their non-tenure track lines that they didn't really need to be doing service in that position. And it's important to know what is expected of me. What do you mean when you say it's 15% of my job? What does that look like to you? Because of course those numbers are make believe, right? We're not all working 100%. Most of us working 150% according to the metrics. So just having a sense of how is what I'm doing being valued, if I'm doing it for someone else, if it really is just kind of service and this is an institutional task that needs to be done. One thing that I think has been really effective for me has been also looking for service opportunities that come with some kind of support. There are some really kind of thankless service positions that are a ton of work and not a lot of kind of good comes out of it for you personally. And there are others that can have actual benefits for you, right? Again, like they can be energizing. They can maybe put you in the room with some people at your institution that you want to know. They might even come with research assistant help or other kinds of support. And so if the positions that you're being asked to do don't come with those things, asking for those things. What are the opportunities to get some kind of support for this role is something that I would encourage folks to do in my experience. And then the most important piece of advice that all of us will probably say over and over again is say no to things. It's hard, it's awful, but it's incredibly important. And again, doing things that you've been intentional about saying yes to makes it easier to say no to other things in my experience. So I have a couple sentence stems there for, how do you frame this? How do you say no? It's very hard to say to your chair, to say to your dean, no. So a couple of just kind of sentence stems there, and just two quotes that people have said to me in the past that stick with me in this context. The institution does not, cannot, and will not love you back. It is important to remember that when you're thinking about being asked to do these kinds of positions, and again, doing that kind of calculus of what it means to you. And Melissa Ionetta said on Facebook at one point, and it just stuck with me so much. She said, oh, if someone came up to me and they said, you really need to do this, really need to do this. The dean really values this. It's really important to the dean. And she said, I know which things the dean really values because she pays me for them. And I love that. So just really thinking thoughtfully about the ways that your work is and can be valued is the big takeaway for me in my experience early on. Trying to be thoughtful and strategic when you have the power to do that. And that's not always the case, but.
Great, thank you.
Nita, do you want me to jump in? I'm happy to. I just finished up a year-long leadership workshop on campus. So I guess I'm thinking about that in those terms. And so a lot of the things Amy covered for me, which I'm super happy, so I don't have to say it. So thanks. But I was thinking that many service roles are really leadership roles. And I had been sort of thinking through what it means to be a good leader. In my first job, I was a green graduate student dumped into a WPA. It was a long time ago. So people don't do that as much to folks anymore. So I'm glad. But I made a ton of mistakes. And so in my new, I call it WPA 2.0 job, I'm trying not to make those anymore. And so I thought I would just hash out a few things. And it really is important to know the system you're in, the stakeholders. If you're in a state job, what the state is, that departments and university-wide ideas can be different sometimes. And so if you get really dumped into a thing like a WPA or running the Gen Ed committee, you really need to listen and carefully sort of navigate how you go about doing that stuff. So it is great what Amy suggested, doing small committee jobs and learn how to be a leader and watch what other people do that you respect. And I have a long list of folks that I just like how to run a meeting. If you don't know how to run a meeting, you should never be in charge of anything because it's really frustrating if people don't know how to run a meeting. And so I have a list of people that I think are really good. And whenever I'm in a meeting, I'm like, what would Joe do? What would Hepsi do? Like I start to think about those kind of things so that I follow along. If you end up in a position that you don't match up with the system, you need to learn to be patient because there are always ways to make things move if that's your job. And I think also knowing Are you in a job to make things move or just steer a ship? If you like to move things, don't take the jobs where everyone thinks you're just steering what's a perfectly well-made boat. And that's my problem sometimes, is I'm always wanting to like fix and adjust things. And sometimes I'm just there to steer a boat. And you really need to know the difference between those two expectations. It's not that you can't steer it another way eventually, but first you need to steer it the way that folks expect, or you won't get to be the captain anymore. Just putting that out there. And I guess my other thing is, if you're in an RSA meeting right now, you know rhetoric, use that in your job. And it's amazing to me how few people like don't do things like know your audience, create good arguments, listen. I do feminist rhetorical studies. There's so much good work there about listening. Like really read those books and use it, because if you listen for just a little bit, you can bring around pretty much anyone that's frustrated by you by just acknowledging that you actually have listened to what they have to say. You don't have to agree with it, but create clear arguments. We are really good at making clear arguments. So if someone demands data, then give them data and don't give them stories. If someone needs a really good story, then don't come with a PowerPoint presentation with a pie chart, because they don't read that way. And we know all of these things, we teach them to our students. And so I just always want to remind folks to actually use it in their job, because I sit for hours sometimes thinking about what is the best way to make this argument. I just had to make one to admissions, and I decided to make this kind of chart for them that I would never make for myself. And they were just very excited by the chart. I don't even like charts, but they needed a chart. And so you made a chart for them. So those are my two bits. Know your system and use the rhetoric that you already know quite well.
Great, thank you. I think Dr. Lynch, I think you had something to add.
No, thanks, Anita. Sure. I mean, those. I'm just trying to come up with something that hasn't already been covered in the excellent remarks of my colleagues. I think. I mean, just a couple things I would add is to, in addition to, as I think Amy said, knowing what's actually being valued, or what the actual currency that's being spent here is, right? And what services and what 15% means, to identify people who either friends or mentors who you really can trust, who you can call and say, I just got asked to do X. I mean, I actually did this just this very week, and called my colleague, some of you may know Nathaniel Rivers, who works here at SLU with me, called him and said, I just got asked to be put on the search committee. I just agreed to 2 other things last week. Doesn't this seem like piling on at this point? And he said, yes, it does. And I trust his opinion. And it's really important to have people that you can run things by, just to kind of calibrate, I think, your expectations. The other thing too, I think, is you don't have to respond to everything immediately. Another rhetorical strategy, in addition to listening, as Rebecca said, is just delaying. You don't have to answer the email today. And if you wait, I mean, again, just to refer, this example is kind of perfect for this meeting. I got asked to be on a search committee, and I just waited for a couple of days because I really didn't know. I wish Amy had your handout. By the way, having really good handouts like that is a good way to get assigned service. So strategic incompetence is also important as well. But I wish I had your handout, Amy, with those great openers you had at the bottom, because I was thinking all week, how am I going to say no to this thing? And I honestly was trying to figure that out when my chair, who I have a very good relationship with, I'm very lucky, came back and said, look, I know this is a lot. If you want to say no, you can. By the way, another piece of advice, if someone says it's okay to say no, then it's really okay to say no. So keep that in mind as well. I think another thing I sometimes struggle with is that very often with service, I'm deciding between competing goods or things that I really do care about, and would like to be in a perfect world, or a world with 27 hours in the day, would like to do 2 big things that are coming up, and you have to, it's easy when it's like, would you like to do this thing you're really interested in, or would you like to do this other thing that sounds terrible? I mean, those are easy, but very often it's, here are two things that you might really be interested in, or you think are really important, or go to Rebecca's point, that would help actually steer the ship in a direction you like, and you have to decide between them. And something I struggle with a lot is that when people ask me, I feel so honored to be asked that I don't want to let people down. And so part of what saying no is also, you know, saying, I can't make everybody happy. This, I may be projecting my own hangups onto the rest of you, but I feel like, yeah, okay, people are shaking their heads. Yeah. And I think the smart chairs and deans can like sniff us out from a mile away. There is an eldest child people pleaser, and I'm going to get hours of work out of that guy. But you have to be able to say, you know, we'd like someone to be on the faculty council, right? We think you'd be really good at that, and they may really mean it. And you have to figure out a way to say, I'm honored by your confidence, but I just can't do it right now. I really liked, by the way, Amy's line of, I just don't think I could give this what it needs. Is a very rhetorically savvy way of saying that. Yeah, and I think just the last thing I would say too is identifying your value. I mean, it's kind of plays off in that last comment. Identifying what you actually care about and are willing to put your shoulder into, because you'll end up being miserable doing service, even if it's good stuff to do, that isn't really your main priority. So try to figure out what your values are, would be a piece of advice I would have. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Dr. Selzer?
Wow, where were you guys when I was an assistant professor? I'm supposed to be talking about ways to keep service roles from eating everything up. And what I have to say, I just want you to know, is based not on my practice, but what I should have done many years ago. It's not something I actually did, but somebody made the distinction between pre-tenure and post-tenure. I think that's a good one. Remember that if you're untenured, you really can't say no to much. So you're on a probationary, you're in your probationary period, make the best of it. But once you're tenured, you can say no. You can decide what your job is. That's what tenure is. It gives you a chance to choose what you're doing. So with that said, I wanted to reinforce the point about, determine how much of your job is devoted to service by your employer, and try to devote that amount of time to it. So at Penn State, I thought that it was sort of like 2/3 research, 1/3 teaching, 1/10. It was like 60%, 30%, 10% citizenship and service. So it was, 10%, 20%. So I figured, okay, that should be 1 day a week. You're figuring 12-hour days. Everybody, we're professional people. It's not a 40-hour work week. But once I got that down, okay, I'm supposed to spend 10% of my time on that, or 20% of my time, then I was going to stick to that. You've got to let yourself be bad at some things in order to be good at the things that are important to your employer. So don't let something consume more of your time unless it has recreational value over and above your normal work, and something that your spouse or partner is in agreement with, that it has recreational value. You have to be really disciplined. That's the thing about being a successful faculty member. I think there's nobody telling you what to do. You have to set your own priorities, your own work emphases, and so on. That's very difficult. It's much easier to have somebody telling you what to do all the time. So if research is really 50% of your job, you have to spend 50% of your time on it. Don't let it slip into when we're on vacation, or when there's time for it, or something like that. Hey, if you're the comp director, that doesn't mean you are the comp program. It doesn't mean that everything has to be perfect in the composition program. Let yourself be bad at some things. Walk away, establish priorities, and allow some things to be bad. Now, the other thing is, under this same category, find a good mentor to help you. So once you determine what your priorities are and how much time you're spending on various things, tell that to a mentor and make sure that that mentor is going to enforce it. Now, your mentor, hey, I would always choose somebody I was like friendly with. That was really bad. I needed to find the most respected people in my department, even if people considered them to be jerky. They weren't necessarily nice people, but they were still highly respected professionals. I should have gone to them and said, I want to be one of the best people in the department. Tell me how. I need your help. And you know what? Those people never get asked to be mentors. So they will take you on. At least, if I identify 3 of them, 1 of them will. And ask them to really help out. Okay, then we're also emphasizing choosing service or citizenship that makes a difference. There are a lot of things that require a lot of time, but they don't give you a chance to make a difference. I served on the faculty senate. Honestly, I couldn't have made a difference there. I was one of a large group and I couldn't move the ship very much. That was not a good choice of my time. Search committees, I enjoyed them like crazy. It's so much fun. But unless you're chairing the search committee, you probably aren't going to influence things very much. So, I'm just using those as examples of things. Try to find some things that, are where you can make a difference. Find braggable items and spend your time on those. That might mean you want to volunteer for things. Be proactive. Find some things in your department that, everybody knows it's bad. Maybe you want to be the careers coordinator. Nobody wants to be the careers coordinator. Nobody wants to run the internship program, especially if it's going bad. So volunteer for that and make it something that is better because you took it on. Find something that you can be good at. Somebody already said this, but try to get that assignment. Then if you do take that assignment, do make a difference. Just don't take on any service role that is just sort of routine and you're not, the job is going to get done whether you do it or not. Try to avoid that sort of thing. And finally, ask the boss what he or she would like to see you do. So you can ask your department chair for assistance in setting priorities. Now, your department head's job is to be your mentor, but a boss and mentor are not the same thing. So you should make sure you're on the same page with your boss. Make sure your boss knows what your interests are, what you volunteered for, what you're doing. Keep in touch with that person. So in sum, just to get the conversation going, do your best to set priorities. Remember that citizenship is part of the job. You are getting paid for it. I know that a lot of people don't do it, but that doesn't mean, nobody pays in. It is noticed. People who are the most respected people in your department are the ones who do take their turn at doing the grunt work and so on. So you want to be one of the best people. So recognize that good citizenship and service is part of the job. Of course, it's very hard, but you still need to be great at it. And the best faculty do their service very well. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. So what we've gathered from all of the conversations that we've had so far is that regardless of where you are in your career, mentorship and being a good citizen are really important. So whether you're tenured, you're untenured, contingent faculty, having some form of mentor is especially important as you're navigating kind of the service opportunities. I also like the way that I mean, Amy frames service as a leadership role. Was it Amy or Rebecca? Oh, Rebecca, I'm sorry. Service, looking at service as an opportunity for leadership. Because that does tie nicely into the conversation that's been threaded through with all of the participants or panelists that say that you should select something that you're passionate about or that you have some interest. It shouldn't be just service for the sake of service. It should tie in nicely with things that you're either passionate about, your research area, et cetera. And so that's really nice. And then the idea that even as you are accepting these service roles, understanding what your role is within that service function. So are you trying to go in there to change things, or are you there just to keep things steady? And that might ultimately also become the decision maker about whether you decide to take on that service opportunity, right? Because if you're someone who likes to, kind of change things, then that might not be the service opportunity that's the best for you and the best use of your time. But if you want some kind of service to get your feet wet, so to speak, where you're not rocking the boat too much, particularly if you're untenured or contingent faculty, then being in a service opportunity where the expectation isn't that you rock the boat might also be a good option. We do have a question that we have in the chat box, and I'd like you the panelists to consider. It is, what are some service roles early career faculty should completely avoid? And obviously this will differ based on institutional context, but are there total landmines that early career faculty should sidestep entirely? And this is open.
I think I already sort of said it, but and thinking about the other question that we had, if you are a brand new professor and you are asked to be the WPA and it's considered a service rather than administrative, you should not do it. If you can find a way out, I mean, some people get hired and that should be an administrative job, but taking on this big giant job, your second semester, your second year is probably not a good idea if you can find a way around it. So I'll just put that out there.
That's a good question, isn't it, everyone? Will the service invitation give you a chance to learn something? So I would avoid things where there's not an opportunity to learn. I've been on composition committee here at Penn. Some very strong and capable directors of composition, and they were going to really be a strong executive in that position. They were very capable people. Well, I wasn't going to get much by being on the composition committee. Other times, I was on the composition committee with an untenured person who was outstanding, who was the director, and she ran it as more of a collaboration. And it was one of the best experiences of my life. I learned so much by working with my colleagues and in reinventing our courses and what did we want to do and what were the underpinnings of our program. And really, professionally, it was a super boost when I was untenured to work with those fantastic colleagues. So I think I'll just throw that in. Oh, avoid assignments that are going to force you to work with whiny people. Get with some real positive people who are going to bring out the best of you. Not people who are just going to complain and nobody loves me, I can't do anything. Hang around with the people that can bring out the best in you.
Paul, did you want to jump in?
Just to say, if you're going to avoid whiny people, it's going to limit your opportunities real fast. So that's one way to just clear it up, right? One thing, though, I was going to say seriously, though, is two, I think, avoid service roles that seem bigger than an assistant, untenured assistant professor should have. You know, in the sense of like, hey, do you want to be our rep on the faculty council? We're about to rewrite, you know, the workload policy. So would you like to do that? Like, no, I really would not like to step into that maelstrom right now. So if your instinct is, gee, this seems like I don't have the experience or sort of heft you need to swing this job, pay attention to that instinct. Because I think when you give off competence, and I think people in our field do, you know, because we do work with a lot of sort of programmatic stuff like composition programs and things like that, first year courses. You can get drafted into stuff that isn't really stuff you're probably, you know, 5 years from now, you might be ready for it. So if you feel like, gee, this is asking, I'm being called up to the majors faster than I'm ready, that you may well be right. And it's not self-diminishment to say at that point, yeah, I don't think I'm up for that. But one other quick thing I wanted to say, go back to some Jack said about mentors. I was very lucky in that we were assigned mentor committees when we were untenured. So there was, you know, there was the chair, and then we had this committee, and ostensibly my committee actually wasn't that great, but in theory, you were they had a formal role in people you could go to. And that gives a little bit of balance. Well, gee, chair, my mentoring committee doesn't think I should, right? So if that's formalized at your institution, that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off that, just to really emphasize the utility of having mentors, both for the advice that they can give and for the scapegoating role that they can play. So when we're thinking about landmines, like one of the things that makes me kind of recall is that you don't know where they are, right? Unless you have the institutional expertise to know that's going to be a really bad assignment. That's going to be a really big assignment. That's going to have that person on it who's a really big bummer and who's going to drain you. That's the kind of institutional knowledge that your mentors have that you aren't likely to have. So those are the kinds of questions that, even if it seems like, well, sure, yeah, I could do this, are really great to just bounce off these people who know those issues that you might not be able to see from the title of the position, right? And again, I have had wonderful luck saying, and you don't have to name names, but I talked with my mentors, and my mentors advised me to pass on this opportunity. It's a one, it's just like my mom said, I can't come. It's a wonderful way to get out of things you don't want to do.
Wow, is that great advice? Yeah, I never thought of that. So you get invited to do something and you say, well, that's interesting. I'll have to talk it over with my mentor. Oh, my mentor says, unless A, B, and C, I should not get involved in this. So yeah, thank you, Amy.
I wanted to say that I actually, in my second job when I was smarter, took Jack's advice to make your own service. I really believe in internships for writing majors, and there was a sort of non-existent sort of program. And so I said, hey, I'll do it. And I turned it in. And because it didn't exist, I got to make it whatever I wanted to, and no one was really paying attention. So then when it turned into something good, that I got to like actually build a boat and steer it wherever I wanted to. And it was kind of under the radar for a bit. And so I did a lot of work, but then I was careful to show folks what I did. And so that's important too. If you make up your own job, people don't know it exists. And so you have to be clear. But it gave me a chance to meet a lot of people on campus, because I had to coordinate with other offices and meet folks in town, which is what I really wanted to do, was to connect to folks in the city where I worked. So if you see an opportunity, and internships are good, community engaged kind of work is good, working with honors programs or coordinating things that are outside of the university and connecting, I think those are really great ways to create the thing that you want, and then show people that you can do it without having to worry about all these expectations. So if it's available, it's not always available, but if it's available, I think it worked really well for me.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of more questions in our Q&A chat box. So Bethany talked about being on a scholarship committee where she had a clearly defined timeline and outcomes. Is there any other service roles or committees that tend to be like that? In your experience?
I mean, if you get invited to be, I mean, one that just springs to mind, Bethany, to answer your question is any ad hoc committee. We're revising our major right now, so it's an ad hoc committee, right? I think it's really important just to, when you get invited to be on that, to ask what is the timeline, right? For, how long am I going to be on this committee? What are you imagining as the steps and the stopping points, and what other committees does being on this mean I don't have to be on, because revising the major, let's say, is going to take quite a while. I guess the other one that springs to mind is, in terms of timeline, is that Jack alluded to it earlier, was a job search committee, where there's kind of a built-in timeline of when applications are rolling in. But when this is good advice anytime. It's especially good advice when you're an assistant, is to ask, if it's not clear, what are the steps on this? When does this wrap up? And to know that going in, so it doesn't become you're just floating out into space for however long it takes.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think in my experience, I have not loved the work that I've had that I've appreciated the clear timeline and tangible outcomes, but as Paul's example of the search committee, again, it hasn't been the most rewarding work from my experience often. So I can think of, like, I for some reason volunteered to read study abroad application essays one season. And it was kind of interesting, I guess, but it was one of those things that was going to happen anyway. The students were going to go abroad. Someone was going to read them, and it felt fairly thankless. And I had a similar experience on a kind of evaluation committee, and I liked that it was discreet and clear, but it wasn't for me my favorite stuff. So I think it's a balance, right? That some of the kind of ill-defined projects that I've been a part of have been frustrating because they're ill-defined, but they've also had other kinds of opportunities. I think it's kind of a trade-off sometimes.
Great, thank you. Jack?
Well, I think Bethany kind of answered her own question when she said, what was it? Defined timeline, tangible outcomes. Yeah, find those things. Wow, beautiful. And if you don't know what the committee is supposed to be doing except overseeing something, avoid. But if you have something that, yeah, hey, this has a defined timeline and it's going to produce something, that's a sign that you're on a good track. I like that term that I used, braggable items. Can you brag about the difference that you made? It doesn't mean, incidentally, you'll ever have a chance to brag about it. And it doesn't mean you have to brag about it to the world or anything like that. But is it something that you would talk about at a party that you were animated by, or just something that you felt like you did a great job at? That's going to be the thanks. Nobody, who needs a bunch of people coming up to you? It's a thankless job. Well, yeah, people don't go around. Do you go around thanking people all the time? At the job, I don't know. I guess I'm overstating here, but yeah, this emphasis on braggable and something that you can really be satisfied doing, that's the key.
If I could just jump in, that has me thinking too, to modify my own remarks. When you can produce timelines and a sense of outcomes too, that's sometimes an option, right? Like, are there ways in which you can say, I can take this on for X amount of time, right? So I'll do this for the next year. Create your own timeline, create your own sense of what the outcome could be. Can you take this as a leadership opportunity, right? So even if things might seem to not have that built in the same way, there might be the possibility to make them that way.
And I'd like to follow up with Brandon's question about balancing the desire to accept a service role at in the department or institution that you work at, but also the desire to accept service roles in professional organizations.
I answered this a little bit in the chat box, but I have realized in working at 3 different institutions that it just depends on where you are, and you should ask your mentor and your department head, because some departments, if you're not on the awards committee or helping with the softball team, people get really irked. And then in other places I've been, if you aren't doing national work, they sort of ding you on your tenure file. And so I think it really just matters about where you are, because in my in-between job, they really wanted you to do labor on campus and really pitch in. And so if I had only done national things, it would have been bad for me. But I know I have colleagues in other places that are really expected to be, on committees for national organizations. And so I really think you just have to ask early in your career what is expected in your file, even if it's not written always, because they're never going to write down, we want someone to take a turn as, running we had this softball game that was really important. And so I don't do that stuff. So I should have asked.
Let's see, if you're untenured, should you be involved in professional organizations and civic organizations, community organizations outside the university? Yes, that's part of your job, but you have to be really selective about it. And it's got to be in the context of your service role in the university. But people are going to appreciate if you've been involved in some way when you're untenured. Try to find something that you can connect to with RSA or some other professional association. Now, you can volunteer, you can approach the leadership and just say, you can tell them, hey, I'm untenured, but I'd like to make a contribution. If you need somebody for something, send me in, coach. Once you're tenured, you have to be involved, or when you're close to tenure, you have to be involved outside your institution. Look for a place where you can make a difference. Volunteer to do something substantial. Maybe it's something that you can build on from your untenured thing. It leads naturally into other kinds of involvement. That's where the fun is. And that's what your institution wants. They want you to be a leader in your field. They want you to do that, but be careful. Don't jump the gun. Take your time. Wait till you're tenured, and then you can take on a substantial role in a professional organization. Before that, and Brandon, I'm looking at you. I wish I could see you on the screen, but you're going to be invited to take on all kinds of roles, even though you're untenured outside your institution. It's going to be very tough. Same with you, Anita. You probably know what I'm talking about. Easy to give advice, hard to take it.
Great, thank you. Looks like we have time for a final question that we have in the Q&A chat feature. I'm curious to hear any advice about navigating large service requirements at a smaller school with a 4-4 teaching load. Were service is a large part of the job. This also makes national service work challenging. And this person is in their first year on the tenure track and would like to prioritize publications, but the service and teaching roles are very weighty. Other than waking up at 4 a.m. to write, which I'm not opposed to doing, said the writer, are there strategies for this kind of position? It's a tough question.
Well, I was going to keep my mouth shut, but now I'm not. So I taught at a research intensive institution. My teaching load was very reasonable, but I don't think I worked any less hard than people with 4-4 teaching assignments. What would I have done if I did have a 4-4 teaching assignment? You know what? I still would have tried to do my research, even though my institution is telling me by virtue of a 4-4 teaching load, they're telling me that research isn't as important as it is at Penn State. Okay, I can get that. But I still need to be one of the best people in my department. So even with my 4-4 teaching load, I'm going to be one of the best people. That means I got to write my articles. And that means, guess what? I'm not going to be a great teacher every minute of the day. I am going to limit the amount of time I spend on grading student papers. I'm never going to have a student conference that lasts more than 7 minutes. I'm going to do the things necessary to carve out the time to get some articles out, you know. It sounds cold-blooded, and I wish I could say, yeah, that's what I did. But it's what I advise you to do, if that's any help. I don't know if the rest of you agree with that. Be bad at some things so you can be good at some others.
That really resonates with me. I'm at a fairly teaching intensive institution myself. We're on a 2-2-2 on quarter system, which is supposedly like a 3-3, so not a 4-4, but that's one of the pieces. I've talked about this before in this similar setting, but the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity has a program called the Faculty Success Program, and I'm obsessed with it, and it's so helpful. And one of the main things that you kind of practice or learn about through this program is exactly what Jack is talking about, which is well, there's a whole kind of week on lowering expectations, right? And the lowered expectations specifically, even though we're all teachers, that's why we got into this. We love teaching. We're already going to care about that so much. That's where it needs to happen for most of us. That's where it needs to happen, even at the 4-4 institution. Where teaching is a very important part of your job, we're overperforming. We're overperforming on our teaching. So underperform just a little bit and you'll still be overperforming probably. So I think that really resonates with me, and it was a hard lesson, and I don't always do it, but teaching is the thing that can just expand to the size of the room that you give it. And so really kind of being strict with yourself about where those boundaries are going to be, paying yourself first, writing first thing in the morning when your brain is the freshest and best, and not opening that email and not touching the rest of it yet. Those are important things to do at any institution, because it's the only way it's going to happen. Teaching will always happen. Your students are going to email you. You have to face them in class on Monday morning. They're there. Your research is not going to knock on your door. You have to go to its door. So it's tough. And so with service in all of that as well, minimizing the service to the proportion that it appropriately should have at your institution, even if that means that it's not what you think you want to give it, but you can't give everything. You can't give all of yourself to everything.
Paul or Rebecca, would you like to?
Yeah, just to add to both of what Jack and Amy just said, I grad school classmate had a great motto. He said, "You're always failing at something. So you're messing something up, just get used to that." But also to kind of go off of Amy's point, I think also decide with any service role, and someone in the chat asked earlier about the sort of weird blurring of service and administration that very often happens. I mean, a lot of what we talk about is actually administrative stuff that should be much more clearly defined. But of course, it does get blurred, right? And that's partially because that is in my experience, the institution not actually giving enough weight to administrative tasks that should rightfully be theirs, and they kind of devolve to the faculty. So to just repeat Amy's point, I think you have to decide with certain service things, am I just going to make sure this runs basically, or do I want to fix this and improvement? It kind of goes back to a point Rebecca made earlier, that there might be service things that you say, I want to build this up into something new that's braggable, right? But there are also service things that are like, I'm just going to make sure this thing isn't any worse than when I left it, because the institution hasn't really given me the time or very often the resources or the authority to actually make this thing work as well as it should. So that can be hard because you want to do a competent job, and saying to yourself, well, this thing that really needs to, X, Y, and Z needs to happen for this really to work, but I'm not doing X, Y, and Z because I'm doing these other things that are greater priorities. I think that's just a place to compromise too.
Great, thank you so much. We are at the top of the hour, so I would like to thank the panelists for providing their expertise throughout this hour, as well as the thoughtful questions. And thank you, Amy, for providing the handout. I'm sure it would be very handy, especially the how to say no artfully, because I think that's something that we all, because we do care about the kinds of opportunities that we provide our students and our the way that we support our colleagues. Saying no can often be hard to do. So I do appreciate your labor in providing that for us. Thanks everyone for attending and the great questions. The video with the captions will be going up on RSA's YouTube in the coming months. If you'd like to get in touch with the panelists, you certainly can email us as the moderator, but the panelists as well with additional questions. Have a great Friday afternoon, and thanks again for joining RSA's remote session series.